sent it to the only guy he knew that would be interested in it, Darwin, who got this letter apparently June of 1858. Wallace sent it, he wrote it in February and sent it on the next ship, which was March 2nd, by boat, so FedEx. So it takes a while to get there. So there is a little bit of a cottage industry of conspiracy theorists that Darwin plagiarized or basically stole Wallace's ideas, but there is not a shred of evidence for this. In fact, all the ideas he supposedly stole were in these 1842 and 1844 letters/essays that he had written. And obviously he was in no hurry until he got this letter. And there was nothing new, really, after he got Wallace's letter that was added on to the stuff he'd already written. And in fact, when they published the joint papers in the July 1st, 1858 Linnean Society meeting, the proceedings of that, it was just the old stuff. Darwin just put in the 1842 and 1844 papers and a letter to Asa Gray basically establishing his priorities, so there was no conspiracy afoot there. And when Wallace heard about it, months later, he was thrilled that he got to be side by side with his hero, his mentor, Charles Darwin, who was 13 years older than him. So that it all worked out very, very fine that way. And I'll come back to Darwin on the matter of religion later. But I want to talk about the theory that his theory was overthrowing. I mentioned this idea of fixed essences of an organism. And the only going theory at the time, the best one at the time, was William Paley's 1804 book called Natural Theology. There was at the time this kind of, the two books in competition, the Book of Nature and the book, the Bible. And there was a movement to kind of marry the two, called Natural Theology. That is, God is a very, as most of you here have noticed, very ephemeral, difficult to grasp, maybe doesn't even exist. The difference between a non-existent God and an invisible God is non-existent. So what is it we're actually studying when we're trying to study God? Well, you study the works of God, the results of his actions. That's the idea. So nature, by going out into nature, you're looking at God's creations and the handiwork of the deity, and that's how we know something about God. So William Paley's 1804 book opens in this famous passage that most of you know. In crossing a heath, suppose I pitch my foot against a stone, and were asked how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that for anything I knew to the contrary, it laying there forever. But suppose I found a watch on the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. The inference, we think, is inevitable that the watch must have had a maker, that there had to have existed at some time in some place or other an artificer, or artificers, plural, interesting, at some time and in some place or other, who formed it for the purpose which we find it actually to answer, who comprehended its construction and designed its use. This is the real first intelligent design theory. The recent version is just a clever retitling of creationism, which got a bad rap for lost court cases in the 1980s and 90s. And so Paley therefore concludes there cannot be design without a designer, contrivance without a contriver. The marks of design are too strong to be got over. Design must have a designer. The designer must have been a person. That person is God. Well, it takes him a long way to get to there. He concludes sort of inferences of what the characteristics of a designer must be like. Must have agency and intention and intelligence and almost like an architect, something like that, right? So that's the theory that everybody accepted, including Darwin, until he figured out a mechanism. What was the mechanism? Well, Ernst Mayr summarized the theory of evolution in 5 parts. So, everybody already here accepts it, so I don't have to go over how we know it's true. All right, that's good. But basically, there was 5 theories in the origin of species. 1, evolution, that organisms change through time. 2, descent with modification, that evolution proceeds through branching common descent. Offspring are similar to, but slightly different than their parents, plus mutations. You get variation on which natural selection operates. 3, gradualism. This was yet another heretical idea at the time, that change happens slowly over long, gradual periods of time, instead of catastrophism, where there's these major traumatic changes. Multiplication of species. There's not just an evolution of species. There's not just new species, there's more new species. There's sort of a multiplication of species. And then 5, of course, the mechanism that drives natural selection, populations tend to increase geometrically. Eventually, there's not enough carrying capacity in the environment to support them all, therefore some die out. Whatever characteristics that help you survive is what gets passed on. So the problem with the natural selection is a metaphor. It's a little bit like Adam Smith's invisible hand metaphor. There is no invisible hand. There's nobody running the economy, as you may have noticed. By the way, I'll note parenthetically, here's what's going to happen. These bubbles inevitably burst. They do. And in about 2 years, things will turn around, be much better, and whoever's in charge, in this case it'll be Obama, will get the credit for it. That's just the way it goes, but that's a different story. Anyway, there are interesting parallels between the invisible hand and natural selection. In Darwin's case, he opens the Origin of Species with a long chapter about artificial selection, breeders, who are intentionally selecting certain characteristics. In this case, he spent a lot of time on pigeons. If you want pigeons with feet feathers, you just breed the two, male and female, that have like the closest thing to feet feathers, and the next generation has slightly more feet feathers. And you just keep, just like dog and horse breeders do, you just do that. The problem with that metaphor is it sounds like there's a selector, doesn't it? And of course, that's what the intelligent design theorists will say. Yeah, you see, Darwin is identifying that there is a selector. That's the problem with the metaphor of natural selection. Right off the bat, it sounds like somebody's doing some selecting. And that isn't at all what he meant. So there's a problem with using metaphor in science, particularly for something you can't see, like an invisible hand. It's really not quite right. And it makes you think that also the species are moving along in some direction. Like when my daughter was young, I was trying to explain evolution to her, and to use an example, polar bears as nice examples of a transitional species between land mammals and marine mammals. And they really have some amazing adaptive features. Thick body fat, thick fur, kind of webbing between their toes on their paws, and they can swim for 50 to 100 miles at a stretch. They can hold their breath for long periods of time and go underwater, and they really are like halfway between marine mammals and land mammals. But it kind of implies that the polar bears are trying to become marine mammals. Like, yes, we can do it. We can really do it. We're sitting here on our little ice pad, and I can just dive in there if I try real hard. And of course, they're not becoming anything except maybe extinct, apparently, with the global warming. Or maybe they'll become brown bears. They'll turn brown and they'll move south, and their bodies will get smaller. Or maybe they'll go extinct. But they're not moving in any direction. There's no prescience to evolution. There's no directionality to it. That's why I like to say, if we ever do encounter aliens, they're not going to be bipedal primates with gnarly stuff on their forehead, speaking English with an Indian accent. The chances of all those evolutionary steps from bacteria to big brains and a bipedal primate that happened only once on our planet, maybe several times, but we wiped out the other ones. And the chances of all that happening on some other planet are pretty slim, right? So that's what sort of makes it unique, but there's no directionality to it. Now, some people would challenge me on that. By the way, Dawkins is one, for example, saying that certain things are inevitable. Eyes, some kind of mechanism for moving and seeing and hearing will evolve. Yeah, okay, but maybe there'll be eyes on your fingertips rather than here, or who knows. Some mechanisms may evolve, but not exactly like ours. But that's a different debate. Okay, so moving along then. So that's the theory of. Also the other aspect that's a little misleading is the business of what you call it. If not natural selection, which is a little misleading, how about survival of the fittest? Well, Herbert Spencer coined that phrase, and Darwin liked it and started using it, unfortunately, because it also implies fit like strong, fast, biggest, baddest, nastiest beastie will survive. And that isn't at all what Darwin meant, and it isn't true. I mean, if big brains were so great, how come hardly anybody has them? I don't mean people. There are some that don't have them. But why do most organisms have puny little brains? They're just nothing. Or being slow and camouflaged and sort of just tiny. Maybe that's the best way to survive. It doesn't matter what it is. It's only whatever it takes to pass along your genes into the next generation. So survival of the fittest, natural selection, it's all a little misleading, and this is one of the reasons people have a hard time accepting evolution, simply because they don't understand it, and there's certain aspects that are misleading. So I'll go over a couple other reasons people resist evolution, and then and then look at the specific claims of intelligent design. So one reason I think people are resistant to is the idea that you have to choose between